Wairea, wairea. Wairea rā te rangi e tui honei, wairea rā te papa e takoto nei. Wairea rā te moane horo mai rā I waho. Wairea ngā taumaha hāruki-ruki e rungi ngā whānau. Wairea rā ngā pōkere-keretanga me ngā pōnipa-nipatanga. I runga I te ao Māori, koenora wairea ngā mana, wairea ngā wehi, wairea ngā whakamataku. Wairea rā ngā mākutu. Kia puta tāne ki waho ki te putanga tā whangawhanga he putanga are ki norongo. Mai e ko tū whakaheke nuku, mai e ko tū whakaheke rongo. Mai e ko tō manawa, mai e ko tōku manawa. Ko e ara e rongo whakairea ki runga tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tēnā. Haumi e, hui e, ai ki e. A kai ngā tihi o runga I ngā maunga tapu. A kai ngā awa o ngā tūpuna, kai ngā whare kōrero e rungi ngā marae whakaruru hau, kai ngā whare maire me ngā whare wānanga. Tēnei, a te whakakao mai rā I a koutou I raro I te tuanui, I raro I te maru o tō tātou whare. Tēnei o te whare Māori, tēnei te tāwharau ake I a koutou katoa. E tangi mō te ana te ngākau, ki ngā mate o te wā. A rātau ko hinga mai rā I roto I te tau aitua, I te tau parekura, kua mahu ake nei. A rātau ko tītaka atura I te ara whānui a tāne haere. Haere rā ki te unia o te mātoru o te pō. I te kāinga tūturu mo tātou te tangata. Haere, haere, tīraha oki oki. Bueno rā, kai ngā kākatara hai, kai ngā manu honenga I te pai. Koutou kai ngā whakairinga I te kōrero, a tēnei rā, a te whakatau nei a koutou. Kai ngā ihi, kai ngā wehi, kai ngā whakamataku, kai ngā maunga kōrero, kai ngā awa tūpuna, koutou, tēnei rā, te maioha, me te oha o te ngākau, kia koutou, kia whakakotahi mai. Akati, te Whare Māori presents this webinar series of Tāne Māori, as we discuss extreme issues and difficulties navigating the myriad challenges that whānau face living life in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In this episode called Ngā Kurahuna a Tāne, we talk about the struggles of whānau life, especially within the context of COVID-19. Ngā Kura a Tāne is a safe platform designed for Tāne Māori, by and about Tāne Māori. Now we intend to counter the mainstream narrative and discourse that continues to describe Māori men as wife beaters, killers, rapists, drunkards, pea-heads, gangsters, unemployed, uneducated, and hopeless. These common narratives have been prolonged in mainstream media, film and television, and the various Crown agencies. The backlash of these deficit stories have had a long-lasting and negative impact on Māori men, whānau, and certainly our communities. The trauma has been perpetuated further by the state, including research that tells us there is a widespread acknowledgement that colonisation led to collective trauma for Māori and has ongoing effects that continue to be experienced today through structural oppression. So today, joining me are our three panelists, and it's my pleasure on behalf of Ngā Waiatatui and the New Zealand Domestic Violence Clearinghouse to bring you the very first episode of Tāne Talks, and what we've framed as a safe place, a safe forum for Tāne to share their thoughts and kōrero. So if I may just start with our first kaupapa entitled Ngā Kurahuna a Tāne, and to provide us with context of who we are and our identity. So with me in Ngā Waiatatui makeshift studio, to my very immediate right, I have a good friend and colleague and part of the ngāhere o te wānui a Tāne, certainly here in Tama ki Makaurau, Joe Stafford. So just I would like to, and as I go further south, we have in Waikato, we have Poata Watene, and Adrian Te Patu. So just a round before I go any further, just as a way and a means of introduction, if I start with Joe Stafford here in our Ngā Waiata Tui office, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Iri. Ko Joe Stafford tuku ingoa, ko Ngāti Maniapoto, Rawa ko Ngāti Rārua, me Ngāti Tama o Kuiwi. Yeah, great to be here.
Tēnā koe.
Great to be here.
Kia ora.
If I can contribute.
You sure are already. So if I go to probably our most furthest place in Aotearoa, to Adrian Te Patu. Tēnā koe, Adrian. Koe nora tēnei wahanga e tuku nātu ki a koe, ai whakatakitaki mai rā i a koe.
Kia ora tātou atua kia ki te mi atu kia koutou. Hui mai nei I tēnei ai inu reira tēnā no tātou katoa. Adrian Hakaraia Te Patu. We know I always throw the Hakaraia in there just to connect with anyone else that's that may be from Ngāti Raukawa or even from other parts that I'm connected with. I'm from Whānau and Taranaki and Ngāti Apa and Rangi ki Wairarapa as well. And it's wonderful to be here in the three. And I really appreciate the kaupapa around the myriad of challenges. So I'm looking forward to today.
Tēnā koe. Tēnā koe te whanaunga. Weno e mihi atu ana ki a koe. Ana kia whakawhiti atu tātou I Ngai kia Poata. Watene kei te uri o roto o Maniapoto o te rio Waikato e mihi atu ana ki a koe.
Kia ora tātou, kia ora tātou. Hoi ana te pai teke te ata kāka. Tēnā rau atu rā ngā kāka tara e kua tatu mai. Ko ngā kupu kōrero, ngā iringa kupu ka whakairia ki runga hei tāhuhu mo tō tātou whare kōrero mo tō tātou whare wānanga I Rangi nei. Reira huri no tō tātou whare. Ko pirongia te maunga, ko waipa te aua, ko te papaorotu, te marae, Waikato Tainui, Ngāti Mahanga, ko tērā taha, ko maua te maunga, tauranga te moana, ko tawhiwhi te marae, te whānau a tauwhao ngai tarangi. Kia ora hui tātou.
Tēnā koe. Tēnā koe te whanaunga. Nei e tūhono nei tātou. Ana koe rā te pai o te pai here I a tātou ma te whakapapa. Te mōhio ai tātou no wai, no hea tātou, no e hea wai tātou. No reira e mihi atu ana ki ngā waimaha. Koe tēnei e mihi atu nei, ko Eruera Lee Morgan tēnei. No ngā wai o oku mātua, nā ara no te taha ki taku manawa uwha, ki taku whare tangata, I roto o rangiriri, Ngāti Ngaho, Ngāti Pou, Ngāti Hene, Pare Hauraki, Pare Waikato, tēnei e mihi atu nei, Hoi nora ki taku ure tārewa, te aitanga tāne tēnei e mihi atu nei roto o te Arawa upu ko takitahi e kore nuku, e kore neke, o Ngāti Rangi Wewehi, ngā waimimi o peke haua, tēnei te o ngā kākahi whakairuiro, o te roto roa nui a kahu mata mumoe e mihi atu nei kia koutou. Now it's really important to just connect with each other via whakapapa and acknowledge each of our identity pillars, if you like. So this particular section, for a matter of some sort of structure and themes, is labelled as ngā kura huna. Now redefined as an understanding in terms of our diversity, our various characteristics of Tāne Māori purely through the virtue of whakapapa and our pure being and life essence as we return to seek out the various sources that engenders a state of well-being through interconnection of whakapapa, pūrākau, tikanga, reo, and te ao Māori principles. So respectfully, I just would like to open our conversation up by just starting the opportunity now that our panelists have introduced themselves, starting with this particular kaupapa, as we navigate our context. And I just want to say that we don't profess to be the experts in this field, but what we do have is that we are all interconnected to each other. So hei kaupapa pātai kia tātou is to really contextualize some of the problems during COVID, in particular, as we were locked down, we were also locked out. And Poata, you and Joe may be able to extend on this in terms of locked out of our pātaka kai, kāpata kai, kite kai, and for some of us, we were locked up. So I just want to start the conversation. I runga nui tērā wairua, but not to say that there was a deficit in our lockdown situations. Certainly, we were all brought together ana I whakawhenua anō tātou, I whakawhānau anō tātou, I whakatangata anō tātou ki o tātou whānau, ki o tātou ukaipo. So just to open up the conversation, and I know Poata, you're a man of the ngahere, man of the moana, mahi kai, mahi a ngā tupuna. Yeah, how did that impact on you in a way of sustenance?
Yeah, kia ora tātou, kia ora tātou. I think probably first and foremost, from a community Te Ao Māori worldview and lens, when the Rāhui came in, our Māori NGO sector had mobilised and self-funded a number of initiatives in terms of kai, pātaka kai net and hygiene packs net, even before the government money started to roll out in the regions. So I think there's a formula there around how whakaaro Māori, wairua Māori, āhuatanga Māori. It's not something that's abnormal when we look at during our time within the Waikato, when we experienced the influenza. Our Māori communities, the kingitanga, we mobilised and that kotahitanga and whanaungatanga, the key relationships around sharing of the whakaaro, sharing of the resources. It wasn't just about your individual whānau, it became a whānau hapu focus where the whole Māori community mobilised within days of hearing that Rāhui was on. And I think he tohu anō tēnā, because it's not uncommon for us to face adversity. And so we've got a long history of mobilising our community resource, and the fact that it gets less and less, but the demand continues to increase, we become a lot more innovative around how we become more effective and efficient around utilising our resources. So what does that really mean for our whānau, tāne wahine mai, tamariki mai, mokopuna mai within the rohe? Visibility. It wasn't about sending emails out and all the high-level messaging. It all came back to our ringa raupa. Wei hoki tēnei, ko te taonga nei, he ringa raupa. Getting our hands, we're callous, going out there, being visible, being engaging. Even as a chief executive, I was on the road most days in the community. I wasn't interested in sitting in an ivory tower because our people don't operate like that. And I'm sure I witnessed a number of leaders in the sector who mobilised, and and I know in the rural areas they were a lot more safer. The seclusion and that whānau connectivity, and that's still, a lot of that's still intact.
Kia ora. During COVID, it obviously exposed a lot of the inequities and inequalities and inadequacies across the board, across all of the interagencies. Adrian, I just want to go to you now with your experience in the various sectors in health, in particular. What did it expose in terms of Tāne Māori, in terms of what really came through to the fore in your observations?
Well, kia ora. Can I just acknowledge what Poata said? Yeah, no matter how flash you are, at the end of the day, after the hareru, you usually get a knife to start peeling spuds and opening cuckoos. So, it was a lovely reference to where we are, that actually, and even those that are in ivory towers and or flash, the great levelers when you return home with your people. And I think, so if I can just also carry on from where Poata was saying, what happened was our people behaved in a way that was quite unremarkable. We did exactly what we were coached and trained to do, and all those that weren't necessarily coached and trained in that way, whether it's back the hokainga, knew what to do. So everything from the top down, so every institution that's important to us as Māori, from tangihanga through to all the things around Manaaki, all kicked in and happened. And actually what was also amazing was that the leadership that came from our people was relative to being compliant. And at the end of the day, when I say compliant, I'm not necessarily meaning that kind of Pākehā reference to compliant. You know, there's still a sense of order in the way that we do things. It's a very regimented way, and you have to be really smart and clever to make sure things happen. So our people just clicked in and kicked into exactly what we were meant to do. And so all the things that happened, whether it was the magnificent stuff that started out, you know, with whānau Apanui, things that happened in other places in the far north, in Taranaki and all around, you know, there needed to be some leadership shown. And at the end of the day, men stepped up to the roles that they were meant to do. You know, it would be more than fair for me to say we know where the real power is at home. So men followed the direction given by significant women leaders in our respective whānau and Papua Niue. But the men played the role that they were meant to do, which was follow the instructions, do the things that we practice, know your place, no matter how flash you are. And so I'm really kind of respectful, looking forward to, you know, further in this kōrero today, exploring some of those things further about where we had to fit and do the right thing. Could I just also briefly say what happened with COVID-19 started with SARS, and actually we knew this was coming. And if there was a perfect scenario globally, someone who works globally in public health, people are always acknowledging the confidence that was given by our Prime Minister, so I'm devoid of the politics, and by the medical leadership, and then by association leadership. But if we're looking at Indigenous communities, you know, our people behaved exactly as we would have with or without Pākehā structures or otherwise. So it kind of complemented, and in some ways we really led ahead of what was happening around the nation.
Absolutely mobilised, Dave.
Yeah. Tēnā koe, Adrian. Can I just add to that too? What wasn't lost on me is just how quickly all of the different health services, the efforts of equity, the efforts practitioners like myself had been working inside these organisations trying to implement in the previous years, were all pushed to the side, right? As soon as the pandemic occurred, and we were scrambling, really scrambling to assemble our comms, because we obviously wanted to ensure that Māori got, that we weren't left out of the thinking for any of these initiatives that were being pushed out. And then so what became quite evident is we started to mobilise ourselves, right? Started to organise ourselves. And what became interesting is that when the COVID funding started to come out of central government to pay for kai, it was then that these regional services that already had supposedly had equity Māori embedded into their delivery, they started to stand up again and say, oh, well, why didn't we acknowledge Māori up front? So I guess the lesson there is that our efforts for equity, our efforts for implementing Te Ao Māori into some of these mainstream services are only surface level, because when the crap hit the fan, they were the first things to go.
Now, that's an interesting point. So just to personalise COVID for me, I had a sister that contracted COVID. She was part of the Bluff cluster. And so we had to wrap around tautoko from the farm, obviously due to the alert restrictions. And so we met online and provided online, such as what we're doing now in terms of the new world and the new norm that we function in, which is this digital technology. And so obviously Zui went through the roof. We met online, we spoke online, and we provided as much karakia, waiata and tautoko to her during the time of her COVID experience, which in the end she's pulled through, but now suffering, may I add, from other underlying health issues. So first and foremost, my sister contracted COVID. We also lost an aunt during COVID, in which we weren't able to obviously farewell her in person, but obviously our karakia, I rere tonu ngā karakia ki aia me ngā poroporoaki, mā enei tū momo hangarau. So I think just to sort of grasp onto the new norms and the evolution perhaps of our tikanga as well, that has evolved through this time of COVID. And on the bright side, my brother managed to hook up and get married during COVID as well. With the limited whānau restrictions and gathering restrictions, I think it all worked out good for him. And on much more of a personal note, our daughter conceived. And so we are expecting a mokopuna in the new year. So all sorts of things are happening, from hatching, batching and dispatching, all via this new medium. So I just want to open the kōrero up now with other personal experiences that each of you experienced during lockdown.
I think for me was my papa. So my papa is 81. He's physically fit. He goes down to the gym at 5 o'clock every morning. So when the rāhui came in, he mea patu I tōna waitua. So there were some impacts for him around his own well-being. You're talking about a kaumātua in his 80s who goes to the gym, he's fit, he's mentally articulate. So as a whānau, we actually had to put together a structured plan around engaging him and keeping him stimulated. I exercised with him most mornings to ensure that we brought some gym gear into the shed so he could continue to exercise. We ensured that he was stimulated in the evenings, made dedicated time to spend to have that kōrero and conversation with him, that he was engaged, because he's very social. And I think the kaumātua, te hunga kaumātua e kōrero tia nei, their experience, from what I understand, talking to Dad and him, it wasn't a lonely one, but it was very difficult because they couldn't have the kanuhi ki te kanuhi. They here ki te wairua. And so they valued that kanuhi ki te kanuhi, the connection. They couldn't bring the mokopuna, couldn't come. I had it at a stage during Rāhui level 4 that I locked the front gate with a chain. And I did that deliberately because I had randoms turn up home and had put Dad at risk by knocking on the door and dropping parcels off. So these were the measures and the extent of manaki that a number of our whānau had to go through level 4 and level 3. And on a person, it was very challenging to go to work, mahi ringa raupa, and worry about whether, my papa was okay. We took turns and shifts at staying home with him. So anō nei te Aotearoa, te ao Māori, te whakaaro Māori, where our kaumātua are still placed at the centre of everything and every whānau wrapped around them. And I'm not sure that was the experience through Aotearoa whānau for non-Māori, but within our Māori communities, we provided that insulation. We wrapped them with manaki.
Whakakoro wai nei o tātou pakeke ki te koro wai o te aroha o te manakitanga. Pehea koe, Adrian, kōrua tahi ko Joe. Anything personal really come out? I know, Joe.
Yeah, look, I was we lost our one of my sister's brother, and unfortunately, Ngā Kaikōrero took over the comms, and so we had kariki every night, and even right to the moment. It was wonderful that we were able to do all those things, and I think, I guess in a lighter sense, we all became experts with this particular technology. We all, I have a qualification that's also in epidemiology, so epidemiology became sexy all of a sudden. We used to refer to it as the Dalbot Worthy brigade, and I often say to people, epidemiologists are people who sit in rooms without natural light and air, and if they're Americans, they'd be flying drones probably. And so all this technology came in. So we all embraced lots of other kind of things, which is what we did. Our people have always adapted. We've combined all the traditional stuff. Also on a personal note, so Huirangi Waikiripuru is another uncle. He's married to my sister. We're going back to Tainui tomorrow to, and I really appreciate the way that the whole of the mutu came together to acknowledge him. And so, all of these things were things that were, I was to use a health reference, were quite unremarkable. And another personal thing, look, my darling, Emma Waimaria Rawson, Tauranga Moana and I were meant to be married in Rome today. Where the World Congress on Public Health is where we were meant to be, and then after that we were getting married today, Central European time, and so you know the good news is we're moving that now because that couldn't happen out to Aotearoa at Easter. So you know there were I think we all experienced different ways of doing some of the things. For me also, I was in Christchurch as an elected member of local government through the earthquakes. And so, you know, when you saw what happened when our people came together from across the motu to support Ngāi Tahu whānau, you know, there was also another launch pad for this kind of things that we were able to do.
We were given what 48 hours, maybe 72 hours before lockdown was going to take place, and aware that our kaumātua had to be, you know, kept isolated. I've got a sister and her partner in the Maldives Downs, and they were isolated geographically anyway. But I was really worried about them getting kai, how kai was going to get to them. And so in the space of 72 hours, I approached a food distributor, food chain, and interestingly, when I went in there, he had just laid off 100 staff. He was looking glum, and I had this idea. I said, well, could we use your infrastructure? Could you keep the lights on, keep the doors open? And so he said, so what were you intending to do? And I said, oh, I'm going to approach all my iwi, or particularly my iwi down in the top of the south, and see if we can put together some food boxes that we can sell to the iwi, that we can get kai out to my sister from Marlborough Sound. And so that was the birth of Home Year, which was a kai box delivery service for iwi out to their people. But that just happened so quickly, and I was really taken aback with just how my iwi chair, Butch Little and Ngāti Tama, and some of the other iwi leaders down on the top of the south, just we were in sync. We were all worried. We didn't know how we were going to get kai to kaumātua, and everyone just pitched in and said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. On a personal note, I'm a papa to Mahanga Tāne, 12 years of age. Busy with sports, busy with kura. So the forced nature of lockdown was quite cool. It made us actually connect, made us be present with each other. Yeah, it's the closest I've been to my boys, and they're pretty good boys at best of times, but it made us have to come together and connect and you know, understand our roles as papa, sons, mum. So that was quite cool.
And now I just want to broach, as we all respectively have these privileged positions and privileged environments to be, you know, to be safe within our own confines. I just want to go to a place that really has exposed during COVID, where the most vulnerable have become more vulnerable. And now, just to sort of segue into some of the hard-hitting issues that actually, you know, out there are some real tough times, not only for food on the table, but just simple safety measurements. So just want to open that kōrero up e Huama, kia tātou anō, te pai kōrero.
Yeah, you know, can I just say, without kind of intellectualizing it, I just want to acknowledge that, you know, after the Christchurch quakes, and I'm just using that as a bit of a baseline, we know that the challenges of the increase in family violence and suicide and the breaking up of marriages was increased. And now that's almost a decade on. So there's everything to suggest that that's going to happen. Here, we know that that's really part of what's happening now. I think there was a kind of a bit of a honeymoon period in the initial lockdown where, and you know, where people were forced through, as has already been mentioned. And I really appreciated that. I know for many of my own family, we were crossing about 4 or 5 time zones to have whānau chat daily. And so that was, you know, that was a very important and heartwarming, cathartic process, for one of a better term. But in reality, as the second kind of wave, and our people, you know, we went against all the trends, you know. You know, I think the number of Māori that ended up contracting the virus was about 7 to 8% compared to at least 39% that were Pākehā. But we also know that that's going to get back to the normal position as we stretch this out. And so not only is there going to be, as we know, less incomes, less jobs for our people, but that just places that accentuates the pressure in the stretch. I kind of philosophically like to acknowledge that the challenges in the first lockdown were mitigated, and there was a warmth, and there were things that were happening that I think were quite fantastic. But part of our reality is getting back into that normal position. And in our area of work, you know, we talk about NCDs, or non-communicable diseases. And so those are the things that most of us will die with: cardiovascular disease, and we can add, you know, the big brown bus that is type 2 diabetes and otherwise. Tied up and in that, of course, is really family violence and the increased stress. And so there's everything to acknowledge that this now is a wave upon a wave. As we're into the second and third wave, you know, relating it to the COVID. But there's been a bit of a godsend from the COVID, but the other thing is we are now about to face, as small and medium-sized businesses in this country face, an economic challenge. I have an expectation that, you know, personally and right across, there are in fact greater challenges, and our people need to be supported and resourced as best as possible, which should be part of a fresh start with a new, fresh government, which has nothing to lose.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Adrian. Nā whakaaro. What certainly has come out of this too is in way of resources, and certainly through the two different lockdown periods, is that the Māori have spoken. Communities, hapu and iwi, have spoken, and essentially they're mobilised to a point that they say, our people are saying to the Crown, to the government, give us the resources and we will look after our own people. Ma te Māori anō, te Māori e kōrero, karere ki ake. So, Poata, how whakaaro?
Yeah, kia ora tātou. I'm just reading a couple of the questions in that have come up, you know, about tāne whakaaro and how we can eliminate or prevent family violence. And I guess for us, HAPE, the Hamilton Abuse Interventions Project, so we're coming up with our 30-year celebration next year. So ahi ka roa ki roto i nei mahi. So been in the game for a long time, as also my mārei kura and tuahine of te whakarurua and the Waikato. I always acknowledge them, our mārei kura. When we're talking decades and decades of knowledge of community engagement, community answers, community solutions. So it's quite difficult for me to sit here and not talk about some of the deficit kaupapa and whakaaro. I understand and appreciate that he mea whakamana tēnei. And the reality is, in terms of the rāhui, victims were forced to stay in the whare often. And so that also played out. Again, the most vulnerable in that situation are our wāhine and our tamariki mokopuna. And I wouldn't do my own justice and tūranga kāre whai mana if I didn't speak the truth about, you know, what the journey looks like for many of our community. And so what I will do is sort of limit it to our experience within Hamilton Abuse Interventions Project within HAPE. And so annually we support over 3,000 whānau members, individual whānau members, through non-violence programs, safety programs for tamariki. We're moving away from the psychoeducational psychotherapy type approach and have now moved into āhuatanga Māori atua wahine. And I've been to a number of wānanga and I've been challenged a number of times. Look, and I don't mind having a challenge, that's what I signed up for. And one thing I wanted to share was that what my Pākehā executive colleagues wouldn't understand is that I'm Ngāti Mahanga in the Waikato before I'm a chief executive. So that comes with a whole different layer of accountability and responsibility. I don't do this just for a job. All the tamariki and mokopuna and wahine going through the service are likely to be Māori, or 70% are made up of our whānau Māori. So I've got an obligation to preserve the voice of our wahine and tamariki, mokopuna and our tāne at the highest level decision-making tables in the rohe, in the region, at the executive governance tables that I sit at. Now, is that easy? No, it's not, because it requires consistent challenging of the need to share power. And, you know, I probably don't say that disrespectfully, but what the Rāhui showed was that e hoa mā, nuku here rā, shift to the side, government departments and our community, Māori NGO sector, bring the magic. Because kai a tātou te rongo mā te Māori anō, te Māori e tia, manaki. So we've got our own solutions, our own aspirations, and that didn't just appear at a 1-3 document, strategic document that rolled out of national office. And I say that again, having come from the public sector and various executive roles in the prisons and in the communities. So what I'm I think the need for our whānau, if we want to experience change, we've got to move away from transactional relationships. You know, our funding, our procurement models are all based around transactional relationships. They're short-term, you know, KPIs, outcomes, depending on what's rolled out from Wellington. But transformational relationships for Māori provide pathways to reclaim mana motuhake. Tātahi nei te ruku ki tau Māori. And, you know, only then do we start really experiencing the aspirations of whānau, hapu, tamariki, mokopuna and tāne. But the tāne pūrākau must change. If I'm going to be tūturu and pono about it. If we look at the prisons, for example, and I won't try not to hog too much time. We look at the prisons, for example, so, you know, the elements and characteristics of tūmataunga within a prison setting allows our tāne to stay in a tūmataunga mode, where they are less likely to experience the balance of ronga marairo, the balance of manaki. And if we reinforce that with wharetu taua haka anake, he mea kai rāko, he mea kai tangata. And if the kaupapa is kai tangata, we reinforce some of that, some of the core take that need to, and some of the, we've got to be brave enough to talk about our own trauma. This is what we know in our experience, our tāne, you know, encouraging our tāne to be more tūturu and pono about our trauma and looking for help and being able to talk to our truth. So I'm sure that some of the other whānau members have got some things to say, but here we Kia ora.
Tēnā koe I tō pono e Poata. Tēnā koe whakapātaritari ngā whakaaro. I think we can all share from our own lived experiences and certainly historical trauma and even contemporary trauma still tends to haunt us. So it's a real kaupapa and it's a real take. And it sort of leads me to think about, you know, tāne problems with a tāne solution. This forum's not about here today to come up with a solution, but just to think into, and you're drawing on tūmataunga in terms of that energy, e tikana, kei ware I aronga, and how much rongo are we doing, and how much rongo are we connecting to. And yes, I just want to draw into that particular conversation as drawing on to the certain energies. So, pehea kia koe. Joe?
Yeah, look, as a dad to twin boys, it's always monkey see, monkey do for me. You know, they are my teachers. So what they need to be in the future, that's what I need to be now. It's quite a simple process. Sorry, quite a simple concept. The process, the implementation, can often be challenging. Is that what you were?
Yeah, modelling it. So modelling.
Yeah.
And I just want to pick up on that. Living with intent.
Oh, okay. That's right. So what Edu was trying to seed into me is a guy in our whare, we've developed for ourselves whānau journals. And these journals operate on the principle of monkey see, monkey do. So we've developed our whānau brand, we co-design, and the boys are part of this process as well. We each choose values that we need to work on as a whānau, individually and as a whānau. And the journaling process of this is the boys and mum and dad, we've got to articulate in our day-to-day lives opportunities where we can demonstrate or exhibit those values, and we come back each night and in place of karakia, we'll do our gratitudes, and we each connect, we reconnect each evening, and we celebrate, or we tell each other what we did that day to live the brand of our whānau. And so that's proved to be quite successful for us. Simple things like if we choose to be a kindness or empathy or manaakitanga is something that we've chosen. And to be fair, we are quite a kind whānau, so we haven't chosen that one. But as an example, the boys might write into their diary, oh, there's a boy at school that no one talks to, so I'm going to go up and have lunch with him. For me, it could be something as simple as, my wife says I'm an aggressive driver, so I'm going to let people in on the motorway. But to be able to come back each night and validate to each other, particularly from dad to the boys, that dad's it's not do as I say, that we're walking the talk alongside the boys, that monkey see, monkey do has proven to be very, very powerful in our whare at least. And we call that living with intent. And I guess there is potentially a template there.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Joe. Adrian, I just want to cross over to you, Adrian, and now that you've managed some time to think about the flow of kōrero.
Yeah, look, I really appreciate, and I want to just acknowledge also what Poata said. One of those things about, for me, historically, having worked in the emergency psychiatric service, worked in the methadone program in Christchurch, also supervised what we used to be called centred dependents and psychologists, and people in corrections. 15 years ago, you just about had to prove to me, if you're Māori, that you weren't profoundly affected as a family member by trauma, either violence, alcohol misuse, alcohol, other drug misuse. It just about showed me that you hadn't. And it's easier to cast a net, which was kind of transfer that net into whakaruruhai, really, with almost all of our people, and that whole transition that's happened, a whole nation within a nation in recovery as a result of all the things that we now are able to give kind of narrative to in any way around intergenerational trauma plus. There are a time also that some of us were referring to our people as not blaming our people, but saying in some ways we were behaving like brown Stepford wives. We were almost like the perfect noble savage to Pākehātanga. So they started to treat our people like trophies even more. And in fact, and as Poata said, doing the kind of things that we're doing, even in the prisons, you take men to another place, to another Jake Hickey place, and it'd be challenged, and it needs to be acknowledged and challenged. I'm just going to pause there because, you haven't worked it out. I'm the Pōtiki in my family, and so I said to some of my sisters, one of them who's in the 80s, would be in her 80s, said to two of my sisters, I'm going to write a book about our nannies. I want to write a book because, everyone was referring to them as, but they also would joke about being dried arrangements. And so I wanted to talk about how I watched all of my aunties and all of our nannies blossomed when our men died. They returned to that place, that beautiful place that they were, and how much of the burden that they carried while our fathers and our grandfathers and our uncles were alive. And how much of the uncoached, without real male leadership, significant number of our people, and I mean in position to, after they'd come to town, what's kind of after 1963, we became more urban. So there was this whole insidious process that a lot of academics were intellectualizing, but in reality, it comes back to the things that have already been acknowledged. So that, you know, we are survivors and or victims of all of these things, and the burden that was carried was often carried in the household, of course, by family members, but by our mothers and our aunties who looked beautiful when our men had gone. And so one of the reasons for it, oh, by the way, my sisters all said, oh, here you go. Here we go. You're going to tell our story now. And I say, hey, I'm just telling it as the baby. As I watch the beauty of our mothers present themselves after they stopped protecting our fathers, after they stopped making excuses for other things, after they stopped defending in some other ways and were able to just be the beautiful woman that they were. And some of our aunties we never heard speak Māori till Kohanga came along, but also because they did speak Māori, but all these things that subjugated. I'll just pause there before I do. I say it's kind of like behaving like, it was a kind of a behavior that I thought was like former slaves enraged by our previous servitude, and the people who are going to behave like that most are the people who had a kind of a power, but were powerless. And that was our men, you know, while our mothers and our women carried the burden, both at the end of it and through the whole thing. So yeah, let's go there.
Kia ora, thanks for opening it up and acknowledge both and all of the kōrero that's flowing at the moment. E tikai te kōrero kia mihi o tātou whaia, i o tātou kōkara, i o tātou kuia, i o rātou manaakitanga, i o rātou mātauranga, and everything else in terms of keeping us safe or trying to keep us safe as much as possible. So ka mihi atu ki tērā kōrero, e noho mai koe Adrian, hei peke poho, hei pōtiki mo tō whānau. I'm one of 12 and a growing whānau. Obviously rations were very few, far in between. So a matter of, I often draw on the survival mode, but I've since come out of the survival mode, but still hold on to that type of kōrero, because it's also, it probably brings us to some of our slides as well, in terms of resilience and having that sense of resilience and sharing. So, but more importantly, understanding ourselves in relationship to each other. Hei hoa, hei tāne, hei hoa rangatira, ki o tātou hoa rangatira, as a son, as a parent, as a grandparent, as an uncle, as a brother, but respectful relationships too, and making so we don't sit or stand in isolation to the rest of the ngāhere or the rest of our wao. Me tū wao tātou. And I think during COVID, we certainly did enact and we did come together. I tū wao tātou. And so how do we generate respectful relationships with each other, with our fathers, certainly with our mothers, with our partners, with our tamariki and mokopuna. And a part of that too, I think, throughout our lives is making good decisions. Kia ora. Kea tātou. Joe?
Yeah, look, I think it starts with understanding the relationship we have with ourselves first. Yeah. And being happy and the skin, in your own skin. I always reference, I had the gift of being able to with my dad and with my wife and myself for his last 5 years. So those last 5 years, we became quite intimate, the closest that we've ever been. And he passed away at 85. And I always reference how my relationship with him evolved in that time. And that's what I always reference, how I need to be with my boys. So yeah, it's just, I believe, it's going back to just having appreciation of yourself and who you are as a dad, as a tāne.
Kia ora, tēnā koe. and a great dad at that in terms of modelling a way forward. And so we're part of an ecosystem, and we're not isolated. And just understanding our part in the ecosystem or the ecology that's beyond just ourselves, but certainly understanding our whakapapa identity. To other gentlemen out there, kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora. Kaupapa pai. I look back at our tupuna who were astronomers, pioneers, global navigators, historians, philosophers, military tacticians, economists, ecologists, where philosophy was normal part of living. Our karakia and how we connected to the environment. Kātahi ne ka rongo nei ki te reo taiao. Being able to be peaceful within ourselves to he mea mauri tau, so we are able to connect to the environment. These are some of the things that I think it's time to be a lot more serious and deliberate about changing some of our whakaaro as tāne. And here's my measure. When was the last time any of us heard atua wahine in a whai kōrero? That's my whittle, that's my challenge. Because the last time I did was 20 years ago, and it was fried by Lake Te Wharehuia Milroy at a tangi. So it's something that's no longer become the norm, and we know that through patriarchal process, the marginalisation of the wahine reo, we've got an opportunity now to turn that around as tāne, and be the loving fathers we were pre-colonisation and still are. I mean, I have a look at our tāne that have taken the time out of our busy schedules to attend this whānau, because we have an opportunity to speak to our truth and turn the tide. And what does that look like? Well, we might necessarily have all the answers, but I will say I've got a wonderful example, and that's my kuia. My kuia brought us up so that we understood the importance of replenishing the environment. We understood the importance of karakia. We understood the importance of kanui ki te ahi kā. So all the fundamentals that contribute to a confirmed identity. We spoke earlier in the piece about confirmed identity and the benefits of that. So my measure is, where will we be within my kaupapa in 20 years' time for my tamahini, for my daughter? That's my measure. And again, I mention it to one of our challenges, and one of our goals as tāne is to continue to be deliberately disruptive. Is to go to all these decision-making tables and preserve the voice of our tamariki mokopuna, tamariki wahine.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe. Ka taia rānei o tātou moko ki te a. Nei. I roto I tērā whakaaro, e tikana. We tend to forget the duality balance. And with COVID, I suppose, in the world as we live in at the moment, it's the imbalance of the environment, of the climate. And I suppose it's reflective across the board in terms of the imbalance of our energies. And ia koe whakahuahua mai nei ngā tua wāhene, he maha. And like anything, it's a duality balance. So, ara ko rangi nui e tui honei ko papa tua nuku e tapoto nei. Ara ko tāwhiri mātea ko tāwhiri rangi. Ko hene moana ko Tānaroa. Ko hene te iwa ana ko tāne te waiora. Era momo kōrero, and just to remember, ara ko tāne mahuta ko hene wāoriki. And so to remember that in each round there is also a wahine, atua wahine. And so we draw on some of these methodologies, not methodology, he tutu, and we feel it, and that's what makes it different from any other atua, is that we feel the breeze of tāwhiri mātea, tāwhiri rangi, and we feel the waters of hene moana and Tānaroa. So it's an intrinsic part of our being as we carry Tānaroa and hene moana with us in our bodies, as well as rangi Aotea. Papa tua hene ahuone tāne te waiora in our leg, in our puha, hene ahuone and papa tua nuku in our feet and legs. So it's good that we open up this kōrero and just share our knowledge and make it real. And so how do we make this real for our mokopuna? And as we've we've heard within, certainly in Ngā Waiata is what we call mokonomics, or for our future generations.
Yeah, look, can I just say, you know, what Joseph was saying before, you know, that's the simplest thing and right on the mark. You know, how you parent your children is really kind of, that's it there. And then everything extends out from there.
Kia ora.
And I think for many of our people, it requires some catch up and some learnt knowledge and relearned behaviour to be able to do that as best as possible. You know, when I think about, and I loved it, you know, what was just being said before about Poata, you know, I'm really lucky. You know, when I hear the story about the queer, and I knew my queer very, very well also, but you know, where else can you get right here when we can talk about people who talked in the metaphysical every single day? You know, when I think about Māori Marsden, and I think about a number of other leaders, and even Te Rangiho and all sorts of people. Yeah, and they were, and a lot of them became kind of institutionalized bureaucrats, whether it was in a hāhi or an institution or even an academic institution, but they never moved away from all those things that were absolutely of value to our people at a time when some of the numbers, they had them. And so, you know, I think we're in that kickstart again. And yeah, the whole idea of being disruptive, you know, someone said, you know, our people were so good at adapting and modifying things. Otherwise, we would have stayed in the stagnant cultural pool and died within that small little pond. And we didn't, and we don't. So whatever it takes to be disruptive, and both within our own processes, but certainly within the institutionally, kept us stagnant. I say, go for it. And saying that, you know, so what do we look like? You know, it's a, you know, if you were to ask, and so if you were to ask Te Rangiho, if you were to ask Turi Carroll, if you were to ask, it's easy, I'm just going like that, whoever really, if you were to ask them 40, 50 years ago what Te Ao Māori would look like today, I guarantee they would not be able to describe what it is. It's slightly different from those other, from whatever their dreams were. And I think it's quite extraordinary. And once again, I don't want to kind of take it too wide, but once again, we're kind of leading the world in a number of things in the Indigenous space, mainly because we're safer. May not be as safe in our homes and in our communities as we really want to be, but actually we're in a safer position than other Indigenous people of the 370, 400 million other Indigenous folk on the planet. We're in the kind of the stinkest house in the fascist street in the world as an industrial country, you know, and so, and our lot is not the same as the Pākehā world, but ours is a different kind of a richness that they will never get to in the next 3 generations. But our lot is easier in another sense than other Indigenous folk. And the next bit about that is like fourth worlders, Indigenous people in first world countries. We have a lot to do with, you know, we have the ability to kind of just carry on and lead by just being.
Kia ora. Kia ora. I just want to pick up on that, and because within our relationships of just being, and being in the various states, obviously through COVID and the various other traumas that our people have experienced throughout history, our kuia, our whaia, and some of our tamariki and mokopuna, and not to really sort of go have a deficit view of the world, but as we pull through, and I think as we have generated and established this platform to begin the conversation, because as I hear the platform and Tāne Talks, there has not been such a platform to be able to express our views. So I really appreciate the Ngā Waiata, the Māori and Indigenous Research Centre, along with the New Zealand Domestic Violence Clearinghouse, to Rihi, Nicola, Jenny Lee Morgan for establishing this platform for us. as we sort of look to the future, Tāne te waiora, and drawing on our kaupapa of Tāne and the various Tāne characteristics, Tāne te waiora obviously adheres to the light and life essence and life being. As we look towards Tāne-based solutions to a lot of our issues and complex problems. So koia tēnei ko te kuhi ake ngā tai kāka, ne? Ka ruia taitia, nā katu tai kāka. E hare te mea ko awanake engari ko tātou. So looking forward and, you know, as the herald of a new dawn is upon us. Kia ora. Joe? We don't have all the answers. Certainly not, nor these are the views of our respective agencies or organisations, nor are these are the views of Ngā Te Tui, nor the New Zealand Domestic Violence Clearinghouse. So just feel free to go for it. I'm not screening. Ko tūwhera te papa.
It's always probably for what does the future look like, eh?
So we've established some of the problems, and now I think it's just part of the start of the conversation, and the conversation really needs to continue.
Yeah, look, I can only reference what, you know, as I walk through, as Eddie pointed out before, living with intent, I just reference my actions against the successes of my boys, right? So, you know, I trip up, as we all do, but I think the important thing is to recognise those trips, iterate and try again. We're not going to be perfect, but we've just always got to be trying. We're always going to be trying to improve. I'm reminded by my wife often. You know, she wants our boys to be good husbands, and so she ogles at me. She says cheekily, "So you've got to listen to me."
A good husband.
And, so, but the message behind that is you know, with all the learnings, I believe, for Tāne, they happen in the home. You know, how we treat our partners, how we treat our monkey see, monkey do. You know, my boys see me treat my wife with talk to her nicely, treat her with respect. Hopefully that wears off on them as well. Yeah. I just can't go beyond that. Monkey see, monkey do. Modelling, living with intention.
Kei reira te kōrero, Ngāi Tiwi, living with intention, and they are watching us. They are seeing every movement that we do, and I'm constantly reminded in terms of best way of behaviour. And I have literally tripped up. Yeah, and totally wear it. And so just to acknowledge all of the kōrero and some of the pātai, and perhaps we might have some pātai to answer from some of our participants today. Thanks for joining. This being the very first of a series of Tāne Talks. So we will gather some of the pātai. Actually, I'll ask Poata, because Poata's fielding some of the pātai there. Poata, how e te ngā pātai? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much covering the pātai that have come through. Yeah. Just about what does it look like in practice, and what would whānau experience in practice within the communities. Also, yeah, other ideas to turn things around from a provider perspective, and how the Tāne journey can be repitched, revamped, and re-energized for positive outcomes. So those are some of the pātai that have come through. I know Adrian was going to have a kōrero there. Hey, Adrian, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Oh, you noticed my subtle flashing, mic on, mic off. It's an ancient Whanganui River process. I think one of those starting places is also to acknowledge that actually the kind of deficit that probably exists in terms of tauranga for many of our men, you know, it's a place of strength because it's the beginning again. I think it's really important that we kind of get over ourselves too and allow ourselves to forgive ourselves as our journey moves forward. I think every opportunity to be in the company of other men that are safe or the safest they can be, whether it's and to find those. I'm learning every day, you know, and I just want to. I'm in my 60s now, and every day is a learning experience, and I get told that every other day. And so I'm learning processes around compliance, which really starts with really. And so, you know, it's also as someone who is a survivor of challenges and abuse, and I'm also a perpetrator in the sense that everything that is about me as a man, half of that reflects a power imbalance anyway, and wherever that fits. So that doesn't mean I'm kind of beating myself up. That also means that I'm much as I am every single day. And so and it's just it's a small start. And in my own process, you know, where I fit, and how I'm received are some of those things as well. I got to say, I'm really hopeful. You know, things are happening that didn't necessarily have that place before in terms of a kind of a, you know, a place for an emotional existence as a Tāne, as opposed to the, you know, quite specific role and place that I may have had before. So, and there was the mix up between what's passion and what's emotion. So I'm kind of coming to terms with whatever those things. And actually, what comes back to me, all those things that I heard in the wharepuni as much as I heard anywhere else.
Yeah, wharepuni. O tātou whānau. I'm just picking up on some of the questions that are coming through fast now from our participants, and te ao Aotearoa now really seeking for support, especially for our mama, e noho takakauana, e noho me a rātou tamariki, our solo mums and mothers, and sometimes solo grandparents, just to provide support for our Tama, for our boys, so the relationship and support that we can give our solo mothers out there, in which there are many. Just opening that dialogue up now.
Yeah, kia ora. Kia ora whanau, I don't mind talking to that kaupapa. So we've, you know, with myself as the CE and the executive board for Hake, we've made some significant shift in terms of our modelling and what we're doing in our wahine space. So again, I mentioned earlier in the piece about the importance to move away just from psychoeducational Western frameworks, but actually adopt whakapapa te ao Māori atua wahine. And people asked me, and I was interviewed on social media a couple of weeks ago, on national social media, and I was posed the question, you know, how's it possible atua wahine? What does that look like in reality in terms of supporting wahine? Well, actually, it's a celebration of their whakapapa and their divine right to that whakapapa. And it's we've got an opportunity as Tāne to retell that pūrākau, re-energise that pūrākau and kōrero. And what's happened is it doesn't happen enough. And I'm still listening to one of the questions in here. You know, I go back to, here's a question. How is it that, without getting into deficit modelling and deficit thinking of whakaaro, how is it that family violence isn't a fixed agenda item on every marae huri noa Aotearoa? Pātai pai tērā. You know, let's be tūturu about it. If we really want to get serious about shifting the tide, let's start putting that out on the marae as a fixed agenda item, because we need to come up with our own aspirations, our own solutions. Now, here's another call that I don't mind sharing. The difference between tikanga concepts that I hear all the time within whare tapawha, whatever other model, within the clinical setting, and tikanga realities. Tātou nei, they're tikanga realities, because then it's something that we experience. It's in our whakapapa. We whakapapa to our people. We're not just working in that environment. We whakapapa and have a different level and of responsibility. Our responsibilities are layered. And then I have a look at tikanga concepts for mainstream. they are aspirational. And I say aspirational because fundamentally you can have mainstreams that could possibly or potentially masquerade as kaupapa Māori, te ao Māori, tikanga Māori. And if they've got the values in that and they can pitch it in the right way, whānau may think that they're going to experience a te ao Māori worldview, whakapapa and experience. And that's in most cases not the case. And having worked across a number of sectors, I've experienced that frontline, middle management and senior at a senior level. So one of the questions here is that, so what do we do when people don't connect to their whakapapa? Well, here's a beautiful opportunity. Let's talk about ahi kā, ahi tere, and ahi mātau. So those states of recognition by the haukainga. So if you're ahi kā, you know, you're the kanui kite, you're seen all the time. Ahi tere, your flames are a wee bit flickering because you hardly go back to the marae. Ahi mātau, back in the day, was one of the worst insults you could ever hear or be called in a marae, in a te ao Māori context, because your whakapapa is not acknowledged, your connection and rights to speak on that marae and within the people in the forums is not acknowledged. So when we're talking about what do we do when we disconnect to the whakapapa, at some stage, if we hold whakapapa Māori, we are going to be called to our own marae, because Wairua Māori is Wairua Māori. It's not confined to Western models of thinking. It's not confined to just everyday mahi environments. Wairua Māori acknowledges the intangibles that are partly present, that are active, that are real for our whānau coming through our services. And if you've got whakapapa, we also have an obligation to go out there and find our connections. All you need to do in a kaumātua is drop a name in the Waikato and ko mea tērā, ka puta nei, ko mea, ka moi hine te iwa iwa, ka puta ko. You know, we've got resources in our communities that can link those whakapapa disconnections that we consistently talk about. And in a clinical setting, it's even difficult if you're trying to use a Western model, or let's look at the whare tapa whā come around since the 80s. And people believe that it's, you know, so there's a misconception out there that it's a tūturu te ao Māori. You know, it gives mainstream and non-Māori Pākehā organisations an opportunity to aspire to bicultural practice. You know, so I think if we can start having those tougher conversations and be tūturu about it, there's never going to be one karehe mea tika karehe makotahi. There's no one solution or silver bullet. Here we, with the whakaaro Māori kai te haere, if we preserve the voice of te ao Māori, we preserve the voice of the community, they're going to experience their own aspirations and we can resource that. So, kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe, kia ora Poata. Kia ora Poata. I suppose in a context, and you'll be familiar, and certainly Adrian, in the urban environments, in particular where predominantly a lot of our Māori are living, who are disconnected disconnected to whakapapa, disconnected to their marae. In fact, kua mātau ke ngāhi I roto I a rātau. And what I'm saying here is through industrialization, urbanization, many of our people living in the big cities are already in that, are already lost in terms of disconnected to identity, culture, whakapapa, and certainly just through the virtue of just living outside, living here, 3 or 4 generations, maybe some more 5 generations living within an urban context. So I just want to bring it into Joe, because Joe's sort of had to adapt, and he's also living with intent, but adapt within an urban context to still hold on and bringing your boys, the twins, up. I roto I te ao Māori, I roto I ngā tikanga Māori, I roto I te whakapapa Māori, Joe.
Thanks, Edu. Yeah, obviously being Mātā Wonka up here in Tamaki, we found value very quickly in being associated, living under the kōrero of the kura that the boys attend. So by default, we become connected with the whānau of the boys' friends at school. So
Ngāhere.
yeah, the ngāhere. So there's that natural association or connection that keeps that whānau whanaungatanga alive that you might have experienced back home in your ancestral lands. Well, you recreate that in an urban setting. But I guess I've got to say too, you'd be mindful too of what it is that you're actually searching for in that space, because you can't get that, what you would get from your whenua. But so you're looking for those relationships, and you're looking for rich relationships that feed you. Yeah. There's a question here from Tim Herbert. How do we get Tāne to buy into living with intent? So we've got to show them, we've got to model that, make it relevant, choose. I'm not sure, Tim, how old your boys are, but try and find values or things that they like, and scaffold some values, some around those things that they like. It could be cracky. Something as simple as you might see that they aren't participating in things at koutou or in sports. This is just an example. So you might want to say as a whānau value, look, we want to be a fearless whānau. And so you need to choose you need to choose things for yourself where they can see that you're being fearless, and it's that monkey see, monkey do, where they see Papa living with intent, and it becomes easy for the boys to actually aspire to be like Dad.
I think part of that question from Tim is also how do we generate or motivate that amongst other men, other Tāne Māori, the living with intent. Because what you've highlighted here is what the monkey see, what monkey do, is the modelling. So how do we scale that? Scale that across Tāne wide.
Oh crikey, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure where to put. We've got a journal. We can share that. But that journaling process is gold.
I think just in the spirit of conversation, we're probably close to the end of our webinar. Whānau, just closing thoughts before we wrap this up. Just final words from our panelists. Tīmata mai aku, Adrian.
Yeah, kia ora anō. Just to tie up the deficit but and cast it aside, I say all the damage had been done a long time ago. By the time we arrived in town, and by the time we were here for a while, the loss in terms of the reo had already begun to happen. And so what I really appreciate, so moving from there into the now, what I really appreciate is there are great opportunities for our tamariki, our tamaiti to engage and find out even more, even if there isn't a connection that's so conspicuous. And when we think about how many of our young people are being raised with people who well, they're Pākehā mother, if you like. But I want to acknowledge that what do we really look like? Well, we're incredibly diverse. But what I do appreciate is that this is an incredible explosion that's happening. And so you can't help but be pulled in and drawn or attracted to it in a way that didn't exist to the same extent for those who were probably born, I don't know, between 1955 and 1970. And so I want to acknowledge that there's been a wonderful expanse of opportunity for us to thrive, and you see it every day. And so I want to acknowledge that. That also means that some of the stuff needs to go with some of the baby boomers that haven't been able to realise some of that, and that will take on their roles, as some of the men as kōrero, and whatever that represents. And it might not be what is an ideal situation, but it is, and that is who and what we are as well. I've got great hopes. I'm not just painting a jolly hockey sticks picture here. When I hear the kind of things that we are doing and challenging, I really think we need to be brave, take on every institution and take on every convention. That also means having those unbearable conversations as men about what our role is, but also acknowledging at a time when many of our men are coming to terms with what that might be, or otherwise. So I think we're in I think we're in better stead now than we've been for a long time. And as I kind of alluded to before, you know, if we were to ask a number of our leaders a while ago, who were no longer with us, what they thought Te Ao Māori would look like today, I think they would be slightly shocked and surprised at the same time. And for whānau, for all, you know, whatever they look like. And so, yeah, I'm also aware that there are organisations and institutions that what are alluded to who are kind of framing things to make them feel better and to align with a process that's not ours. And so somewhere in there, we as men just have to be as brave as we're able to be. And ultimately it comes back to the kind of strengthening and reforming of whatever our families can and should look like. And if that means we take a leadership role, then we do that. If that means we have to find out what that leadership role looks like, then we do that as well. But it all sits in understanding our relationship, you know, with the woman who profoundly influenced who and what we are also. So that's kind of where I kind of think we're going in the now, and I'm glad and proud we're at a place that we are. We've got to go. I want to acknowledge that. So kia ora, kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Adrian. Bueno, tukuna te kia koe e Poata.
Kia ora tātou, whatukura mai, mārai kura mai. Tēnā rawa atu tātou e aro nui nei ki te kaupapa. Just beautiful. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I knew an hour and a half we would just sort of press the surface because it's complex, it's layered. There's a number of contributing factors, but I like Adrian's kōrero, you know, and Eruera about what does it look like for us moving forward. And my kōrero is pretty simple, you know, tāne mā. We were the astronomers and we still are. We still are the pioneers, we still are the global navigators, we still are the historians, philosophers, the military tacticians, the economists, the ecologists. And we still have to speak to our own truth. We still have to deal with our own trauma to a certain degree, but we don't have to do that on our own. We do need to be courageous, we do need to be brave for our tamariki and our mokopuna, and we have the opportunity to be kaitiaki of our whakapapa. The restoration and preservation of mana must be and continue to be a key focus for tāne I nā tātou ka nuku whakaamua. Kia ora hui tātou.
Tēnā koe Poata. I te rangatira, bueno kia koe Joe, kōrero whakamutuna.
Just some final comments. Our boys, they need dads, they don't need mates. So we've got to understand our role to be a dad. Also, don't be afraid. We've got to also understand, in being a dad, keep our egos at the door, check in our egos, because they can often speak, they can often kōrero what words that we don't actually want to say, right? And just value those relationships that we have with our boys. Show vulnerability. Don't be afraid to say sorry for when we trip up, because we will trip up, and that's just being honest, and that's just validating to them that they can trip up too, and not and you know, not have to worry about that. Yeah.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe Joe, kai aku rangatira, nā tēnei o ngā pai kōrero. Poata, korua ngātahi, ko Adrian, e noho mai I tawhiti, ko mai a māu au tira mātau o ngā waia te tui, tēnei te mihi atu kia kōrero au tira ki te hunga I tahuri mai, ki te whakarongo, ki te mātakitaki rānei, I a tātou kōrero, tēnā koutou, I huri mai ki te whakarongo, ki te kaitaringa, ki ngā kōrero mai no I te timatanga a Tainui ki tēnei wā. Ko te timatanga tēnei o ngā kōrero, haere ake nei. Tō reira, koia tēnei te oha o te ngākau I ngā whakaaro, ko whakapuakina maira e tēnā, I ngā momo pātai, e tikana kia mihia, ngā whatukura me ngā māreikura. E ai o ai tō tātou noho ki runga I te mato o te whenua, koia tēnei te mihi atu. Bueno rahi tuku nā tupea tērā kia tātou anō, mā tēnā ona e tuku mai I ona ke karake ka katahi ka mutu mai au, ka tuku nā te wahanga, ko kia koutou mātou tātou e whakata. Kia ora mai.